Hi, I've got a prescription for diabetes test strips. How much is the copay?
That could take me a while to calculate. In the meantime, you should think about over-the-counter Contour Next test strips. You get 35 for $19.99, and they're highly accurate. For full details, visit contournext.com/radio.
And everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock.
The Chosen Season 3 begins in theaters November 18th. Learn more at thechosentickets.com.
Did you approve of the sermon?
A little long, but effective.
Welcome to Find Your Daily Calm. I'm Sel Gaston. This special episode is a rebroadcast of the Proud Stutter podcast hosted by Maya Chupkov. I had a wonderful time co-hosting with Maya, the producer and host of Proud Stutter podcast. Maya is a writer and storyteller whose work is rooted in social justice and narrative shift. As a woman who stutters, she is a stuttering advocate working to shift societal norms around stuttering and the disability community. Maya lives in San Francisco with her sister, fiancé, and doggie. I'm honored and grateful to have been invited to co-host with Maya in this episode, where I learned so much about the true nature of stuttering. The guest was Josh Compton, a professor of speech at Dartmouth College. How did Josh end up teaching speech for a living? This is one of the many topics we get into about the intersections between stuttering and public speaking.
I'm Maya Chupkov, and I'm a woman who stutters. Welcome to Proud Stutter, a show about stuttering and embracing verbal diversity in an effort to change how we talk about it, one conversation at a time. Welcome back to another episode of Proud Stutter. Today, I am joined by Giselle Gaston, our guest co-host. Sel is a mindfulness coach and producer and host of Find Your Daily Calm, a podcast. We will be interviewing our guest for today's episode, Josh Compton, professor of speech at Dartmouth College. Welcome, both of you, to Proud Stutter.
Happy to be here, Maya.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Thank you, Sel.
Before we get started, Sel, I'd love if you can take us through a quick mindfulness exercise before we dive into our interview.
Gladly. Every morning when you wake up, the first thing that you need to do when you wake up, aside from opening your eyes, is to sit up on your bed and do some breathing. Because the breath is the first thing that we need to be aware of, need to be mindful about. So sit up, and when you are already awake, alert, and of course you're alive, you try to stand up and get some sun. Get that sunlight hitting your eyes. And once that is done, of course, I would assume you're outside. If it's possible for you to go barefoot, or if it's too cold, try to wear some shoes or a slipper. But the thing with the foot getting in touch with the earth is you're getting in touch with the energy of the earth and the sun. And the next thing that you can do is, most of us are thirsty, especially if you are a mouth breather at night, or you tend to breathe through your mouth when you're sleeping, so you're probably thirsty. Get some water. And then once you've gotten that water, don't grab that coffee yet. It's so tempting to turn on that coffee maker. Just turn it on. Let the coffee brew, but take a 5-minute, at least 5-minute walk outside. If the weather doesn't permit, because it's too cold, there's 15 inches of snow, try to walk where there's no snow or where there's sunlight as well. Try to get that mobility, because when you're walking, ideally outside, your eyes will suddenly be alive because it will search and will be scanning the environment, getting, absorbing all the energy of the earth, the atmosphere, and the wind and the sun and the elements. That's the time you go back home after the 5 minute minimum walk that you can take. Then go home, grab that coffee, and be mindful of that taste, of how that coffee affects you. So be mindful of waking up, walking, and sipping that coffee.
Thank you so much, Sel, for that wonderful morning wellness routine. I'm definitely going to try that out. So, Josh, I hope you're ready for our conversation after that wonderful exercise. And yeah, let's dive right in and get to it. So, the question that first comes to mind is, what is your earliest memory around your stutter?
I can remember as a child having a very pronounced stutter. I remember maybe one of the earliest memories would be kindergarten, when I can recall trying to answer questions in class, and not only the anxiety that would come as I would experience blocks and repetitions, but the pre-anxiety that I would experience knowing that I was about to have those blocks and those repetitions. That compounded as I grew older, the pre-anxiety part. Because I think as a kid, maybe I wasn't quite as concerned about how people were reacting to my voice, but as I grew older, that social element became more of a concern. And then I used to describe it as my stutter went away. I became much more fluent. Let me restate that. I used to think that my stutter went away. What I learned much, much later is that my stutter simply went under. It went undercover. I became an expert in maneuvering around it, in doing lots of vocal tips and tricks that became just part of the way that I spoke. So it got to the point where I wasn't consciously avoiding the stutter. I was just doing it because that's what I had learned. And I used to be really proud of that, like that I had, overcome my stutter. But that's not what happened. I learned, and we're jumping ahead now 4 decades, but I learned 4 decades later this concept of covert stuttering. Everything clicked. I mean, I was able to identify again that the stutter never went away. It just became really good at hiding. And in fact, I know to the day when I learned the term covert stutter, I looked it up on my email. I had read an article about it. It was a threshold moment for me in the way that I started to think about my own voice and my metric for success.
Language is such a powerful tool to really come to terms with your identity. And I think the first time I heard covert stuttering, it really just made me feel like there was something out there that described how I was feeling and how I was walking through life. And it was almost this awakening and this sense of, I'm okay. Like, this is something that I'm not the only one experiencing. Covert stuttering is really, I learned, felt by so many people who stutter, and just getting that from language is crucial.
Yeah, that's exactly how that felt. That there was a term for my voice. It answered a really simple question that I had been having, and that was I wondered if I still stuttered. And that's a strange question maybe to think about, because you would think that simply voicing that question answers the question for you. And that's the way that I was seeing it, was that I shouldn't have to grapple with this idea of whether I stutter. or not. Simply asking it should answer it. And that reminds me of, I started thinking a lot about my stutter when I arrived here at Dartmouth. I can remember asking my mom on the phone, when did I stop stuttering? And there was this long pause on the phone, and she said, honey, you still do. And that was an interesting moment, to hear that maybe my stutter wasn't as covert as I thought that it was. That made me really anxious, because again, back then, my metric for speaking success was fluency. So that got me thinking a lot about stuttering. And then my worry became, well, if I start thinking a lot about stuttering, am I going to start stuttering more? Is focusing on my stutter going to cause me to stutter more? And that's exactly what happened. I did have a drop in fluency. So I kind of felt like I no longer had the choice to choose to be a covert stutterer, because now it was becoming much and more overt. This kind of twists and turns was this constant shifting of my metric for what speaking success looked like, what my own voice sounded like, how I felt about my own voice. And then all of this became nicely packaged for me under this concept of covert stuttering. And it was such a relief, but also kind of scary too, because I'd been speaking at that time for 42 years. And so it was a strange way to reframe such a core part of my identity.
There are so many layers to stuttering. And one layer that I have been thinking about but haven't really talked about yet is mindfulness, and how mindfulness interacts with stuttering. And does mindfulness play a role in helping with fluency, or just being more okay with the stutter? And so, Sel, I'm so glad you're here, because you don't stutter, but you do have a lot of experience with mindfulness. And I'm just curious what your perspective is and how you might see the connection between stuttering and mindfulness.
Well, the image that comes to my mind right now, and it's not in any way trying to describe what a stutterer is experiencing, but this is what came to my mind right now. It's like the sea, a body of water, say a sea that's quite chaotic on the surface. But if you go underneath, if you're a diver, if you skin dive, suddenly the water becomes calmer. And it's a perceived calmness, relative calmness, because it's really not that calm, because there's also undercurrents or riptides underneath the surface. But it's relatively calmer, and you could see through the water that you could not see from the surface. I'm not in any way trying to oversimplify the situation, because at some point, perhaps when I was younger, I was also afraid of public speaking. My mother would say, open your mouth, enunciate, things like that. So you're mumbling again. So I became conscious of that. And what I realized was that up to this point, what's giving me anxiety are what people would think and say after I give that short sentence or that brief poem. But at some point, I said, I'll just make the mistakes where I make them and do it again. So I also went through a phase where I was very mindful of what they're going to say about me and how I would be judged after I deliver that. Like right now, I'm having this wonderful experience with you guys to understand the context of what you guys are experiencing. Because to me, you sound fantastic. No? You sound great, and had I not been told that you stuttered before, or you were what you would call a covert stutterer, maybe I was also a covert stutterer when I was younger. But this is a great appreciation that I'm experiencing right now, and I'm seeing this realization and feeling this realization that it's probably the pressure that the people are putting on us when we say the things we say the way we say it.
It makes me think of you, Josh, and your journey to becoming a teacher of speech and of debate. And I am just like, how does one with a stutter go into the career of teaching public speaking and debate? I just think that is incredible.
So I used to say, or let me back up. I was once asked how I succeeded in my career as a speech professor in spite of my stutter, and now I can say quite confidently that I succeeded because of my stutter. My stutter makes me incredibly empathic, empathetic toward my students. I know what it's like to not be able to trust one's voice, to lose confidence in one's voice, to speak through the anxiety. And so I bring that with me to all of my classes and in all of my interactions with my students. And that helps to inform the pedagogy that I teach from when it comes to public speaking in particular. And that's a pedagogy of dialogue. Good public speaking is dialogue. It's collaborative communication between one and many. It doesn't have to be a performance model. We don't have to perform as a confident speaker. We don't have to perform as someone with credibility and someone with something important to say. We can be that. And when we shift from this performance model, all the metrics that we use, like fluency and like bombastic delivery style, those things fall away because the metric for good dialogue is understanding. All it takes for that, is people with open minds, people willing to meet each other and consider ideas. So my public speaking course is as much of a public listening course as it is public speaking, because I'm trying to create communities where we make space for ideas and understanding. It took me a long time to get to that point. I might add too. I never would have dreamed that I would teach public speaking. I mean, if you were to make a list of the top 10 most likely careers for the stutterer, I doubt that speech teacher would crack your top 10, right? Probably not your top 100, but it should. It shouldn't be that surprising, right? If we start to see speech for what it actually is and communication for what it actually is.
So what made you want to get into public speaking?
I took a speech course in college because I had to. I remember it was my very first term in college. This is back in 1993, dreading the fact that I had to take this public speaking course, and every student had to. I remember studying that student handbook, and I thought I had found a loophole that was going to get me out of this class. And so I arrived early with the passages highlighted in the handbook that was going to get me out of this. I thought that I would be there just long enough to make my case, and then I would be released. But as soon as this professor began talking about public speaking from this more dialogue perspective, I was intrigued and I was surprised and excited, still very skeptical, but willing to give it a try. That professor ended up taking me under his wing and introducing me to the speech and debate program, and I found a different side of my voice there. I would later find out, by the way, that this speech professor was one of the nation's most winningest speech and debate coaches. He had led his team to something like 18 consecutive national championships. And had I known that, I never would have even arrived to the classroom to try to make my case to get out of it. I think I would have just been out of there. I was very lucky. I was very lucky to be introduced to a different way to think about speech and set on a path where I could find a different way of thinking about what makes good public speaking, what makes a good speech. That didn't solve everything. I will say that I joined the speech and debate team, and I was fortunate. I was really good at it, and I won a bunch of awards, some state and national titles, but most of those awards were for speeches that I had written and memorized beforehand. And I had discovered long before that memorization is a way that I could avoid a lot of my stuttering. Now, those speeches didn't sound memorized. They did well because they sounded spontaneous, because they were written for the ear, and I had learned to write the way that I speak. But they were still, I still knew what I was going to say in those speeches. I would say that's the second easiest way for me to engage in covert stuttering, and that's to memorize. And that's not practical. By the way, the first ultimate way to covert stutter is silence. That's the method that I used more often. Frankly, that's the method that I still use more often when I engage in covert stuttering, and that's not speaking up. But that's a work in progress. It's a lifelong work in progress where I'm learning more and more to practice what I teach, to use my voice in a much more confident way. So I'm learning along with my students. That's how I found success in teaching public speaking, was to meet my students where they are and go on this term-long journey with them, and we teach each other, and it's transformative.
I wish I can go back in time and take that public speaking course, because I feel like I would have learned a lot, especially in my work life over the years. The frustration I feel when I'm speaking, my jobs over the years has required me to speak spontaneously. I'm not the type of stutterer to memorize things, because I just don't have the energy and I'm too impatient. And so I kind of just wing it. So many times, probably 70 to 80% of the time, what I want to say from my head is not what comes out. And I judge myself so much because I know I'm so smart, and I know I can be eloquent, and I'm eloquent in my head, but then when it comes out, sometimes I feel like I sound like an idiot, or I sound like I don't know what I'm talking about. And in my current job now, there is a lot of those feelings because I'm facilitating conversations, and a lot of the people in the room are very passionate and smart, and they're looking at me to help facilitate them. And there's just so many, because it's not about the stuttering, it's also about the disconnect between what I want to say and what comes out.
Absolutely. For me, I have two really pronounced moments of anxiety when it comes to my stutter, and that's before I speak, that anticipatory anxiety, and then in the moment of a block, in the moment of when the word's not coming, and I'm quickly trying to find a word that is going to work, that might not be the word that I actually mean, but is something that I can say. And that anticipatory anxiety is what I was thinking a lot about whenever Sel was talking earlier about mindfulness. I would have found his steps to be really useful this morning as I was working through, because my stutter that's emerging now as we're talking began hours ago. It began last night. It began weeks ago, Maya, whenever you extended this invitation. I felt like my stutter now began then, as I was thinking about this conversation, and as I was playing over the different ways that it might go, and as I was talking aloud and imagining the type of questions you might ask. Well, gosh, I guess the stutter goes back, 47 years ago, right? There are these discrete moments where I feel a rush of anxiety and nervousness, again, in the moment of the block. But there's also more of this long-term anxiety too, this anticipatory anxiety. And all of those things affect how I think about myself and how I think about my voice, and ultimately how my voice comes out. I relate so much to what you just said, Maya, and I value the advice that Sel has given about that.
I loved what you said, Josh, about what really matters, and what's the most essential thing about communication is understanding. And when you're communicating and being mindful of communication, which is, of course, both ways, the understanding of these two parties, these two persons, if it's just two people communicating, or one person to a group of people, that's the only thing that matters. The things that you talk about, the fantastic inoculation theory, which I was glued to for the past hour before I went to this is going to embarrass my schoolmates 40 years back when they say that those who stutter are probably not smart. Well, if my friends are thinking or listening to this, think again, because they are not. The two people who are with me here today are the perfect examples.
Thank you.
You may listen to the whole episode on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Just key in Proud Stutter, and you may listen to all the other fantastic episodes of Maya's wonderful podcast. The Proud Stutter Podcast Project is funded and supported by Maya Chupkov and patrons like you. Every dollar goes a long way to make this project possible and to help connect people from around the world. Community members are kept posted on the updates and resources made available because of their support. To know more, please visit proudstutter.com. I sure hope you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please don't hesitate to tell Maya, let her know that you appreciate what she is doing. Send her a message, drop her a line at www.proudstutter.com. May you be calm, may you be at ease, and may peace be upon you.
When you think about something that brings out the best in us, it usually involves helping someone else. By donating plasma at a Grifols Center, you can help save millions of lives and show your good side to the world. You'll join thousands of people who donate safely each week, so patients get the plasma-derived medicines they rely on. And you'll be rewarded up to $1,000 your first month. Learn more at grifolsplasma.com.
And everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house. But it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock.
The Chosen Season 3 begins in theaters November 18th. Learn more at thechosentickets.com.
Did you approve of the sermon?
A little long, but effective.